This episode of Trifles is made possible by listeners like you who support us on Patreon and Substack. To learn more, go to patreon.com/trifles or trifles.substack.com.
Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, Boscombe Valley was mysterious, Shoscombe Place was old, and the lodge was hysterical, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? Was Holmes more of a tea drinker or a coffee fancier? And what are all of the alcoholic drinks mentioned in the stories?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Bert Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 458, The Moor as a Character. Hello and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we get into the details in the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Bert Wolder.
And Bert, are you, well, I know you're a character, but are you ready to go out among the Moor?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got my costume on. I've been trying it out, and I what I like to do when I put these clothes on, these disguises on, particularly for holidays like Halloween, I like to go out to the front lawn and find kids or young adults and sort of ask them, well, what do you think? And everyone I showed this to looked at my costume and said the same thing. Othello, they said to me, where did you come from?
It's amazing your house doesn't get egged more often.
Oh, it does. It does. But at breakfast, I really like that.
That's good.
Very helpful.
You stand out there with your catcher's mitt or your basket.
Particularly on warm days. If it's very hot, you can get some scrambled eggs at a really great price.
I'm sure you can. Well, we're not here to talk about eggs or Halloween, but it is October, and it's a perfect setting to talk about the Hound of the Baskervilles. And in this case, we thought we'd talk about something a little different, and that is the setting, the character of the Moor in the Hound of the Baskervilles. Earlier this season, I think it was back in June, in episode 441, we talked about the Moor, its location, its physical aspects, etc. But we thought it might be interesting to take some inspiration from an I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere episode in which we were told that the Moor was actually a character in the story. How does it fit together? How do we work through it? Who inspired us? Well, stay tuned because you'll get all of that and more in just a moment. Get that and more?
And more,
anyway,
I did.
You let it go.
You're
That's
so
good.
clever.
Well, if you would like to support the show, we have a number of ways for you to do that. You can do it on Patreon. You can do it on Substack. You can do it simply by writing a rating or a review for us and sharing it among your Sherlockian friends. Lots of different ways, and it's all up to you as to how you would like to contribute. We have links in the show notes to all of those ways to connect, so check that out. Patreon.com/trifles, trifles.substack.com. We're available wherever you listen to podcasts, even if it's on YouTube. But please tell people about us and spread the word. We even have some bonus material for those of you who are financial supporters. See what works for you, and we appreciate your contribution to our community. Okay, well, here we are in October. This is traditionally the Hound of the Baskervilles month. I think all of the chronologists, regardless of the year that they choose for the dating of the Hound of the Baskervilles, all agree that it did take place in October. And I don't know about you, Bert, but it just, the autumn just seems right for a rereading of the Hound of the Baskervilles and of sharing it with our listeners.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Well, anytime is right to reread The Hound of the Baskervilles, but the change of seasons, particularly crisp, cooler days, yeah, absolutely.
Well, it is back to those crisp, cool, early days of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere that we take you all the way back to 2014 in an episode with Bert Coules, who was the head writer for the BBC radio series with Clive Marrison and Michael Williams. In episode 68, Bert talked to us about Sherlock Holmes on the radio and how he got his start. And before he did this Marrison and Williams series, he did an episode, or it was a couple of episodes, I think it was a two-hander, for the BBC radio with Roger Rees as Sherlock Holmes in The Hound of the Baskervilles. It was directed by David Johnston, and Bert tells us about his involvement, the casting, and a light bulb moment with respect to this story. Take a listen.
I'm always consulted, right from the beginning. I'm consulted about casting. I'm always consulted about any script changes that the producer wants. I'm always at the recordings. Nothing happens without it being passed through me on the whole, which is a wonderful thing for a writer and very, very rare. So I chatted to David. He said something to me that I've never forgotten. He said, we have 4 stars in this show. We have Sherlock Holmes, we have Dr. Watson, we have the Hound, and we have the Moor. And we must give each of them their due time and their due emphasis.
That's very astute.
Isn't that good? He was a great director, David Johnson. He really was. And I said, well, the Hound, I can see how to do the Hound. The Moor, he said, we use music. We use music and we use minimal sound painting to give people the bleakness and the expanse and the quiet wind in the trees and the owls at night and all the rest of it.
And what sort of music would one commission or use for bringing the Moor to life?
He used an existing piece of music which I'd never heard of, called Egdon Heath by
Gustav Holst.
Gustav Holst, yes, indeed. The man who wrote The Planets, for which he's much better known. But Egdon Heath is wonderful. I recommend your listeners to go and find a copy and listen to it. It's exactly what David described the Moor as being. It's open and bleak and mysterious. It fitted so well. I can't tell you. I was so delighted with that.
All right.
Oh, it's nice to hear that again. Also, particularly to hear Egdon Heath. What wonderful music that is.
Yeah, Egdon Heath. And I don't know if you're aware of Egdon Heath. Our listeners are aware of Egdon Heath. It's Opus 47 from Gustav Holst. It was subtitled A Homage to Thomas Hardy, or a homage to Thomas Hardy. Egdon Heath is not a real place. It's a fictional place, but it's in Wessex in the southwest of England, so very much in that same area as Dartmoor. It was the setting for the return of the native, and was mentioned in The Mayor of Casterbridge. And there's a section of the Return of the Native that I think captures the essence of what Egdon Heath was and also of what the Moor is. A place perfectly accordant with man's nature, neither ghastly, hateful, nor ugly, neither commonplace, unmeaning, nor tame, but, like man, slighted and enduring, and withal singularly colossal and mysterious in its swarthy monotony.
Swarthy monotony.
Yeah. That's a
Interesting.
boring version of Othello.
Well, thank you, Iago, but I'm perfectly happy with Desdemona. Leave me alone. Well, the problem with that, or I shouldn't say problem with that, but it's odd that one of the things that's sort of missing there is the romanticism. And of course, that's what is going on here. I mean, the interesting thing about Conan Doyle is that in his world, and he spends so much time with this. We've talked previously in Trifles too about Conan Doyle as word painter. In the works of Conan Doyle, the landscape is rarely just scenery. And here, the Moor is this sort of active, almost alive force. And it only appears a handful of times in the work of Conan Doyle. And the Hound, of course. And that's sort of where it does play this great, memorable world. But Doyle uses the Moor and other kinds of desolate is a good word, settings to express a whole bunch of things, to express danger and moral isolation and all the primitive forces that run in contrast to Victorian sensibility and Victorian order. And that's why it's interesting to hear Bert, because what Bert said there was, he has this director who says to him, this is a character. And then immediately you think, well, wait a minute now. I mean, if I was trying to give a character personality and it was an actor, I could say, here's an accent, here's some emotions you need to communicate. But this is a landscape. So how do I do that? And his answer, of course, is, wind and sound and music and all those other things.
Yeah, and look, I think it's set up well for us, not only in the radio drama, but certainly in the original story. When we first hear or read of the legend of the Hound of the Baskervilles from that manuscript that Dr. Mortimer brought with him, obviously we're told of the maiden fleeing across the moor and Sir Hugo catching up with her and the Hound catching up with him, and then of course the three daredevil roisterers that were watching the Hound standing over Hugo. They shrieked with fear and rode for dear life, still screaming across the moor. One died that night of what he had seen. The other twain were but broken men for the rest of their days. And that legend ends with the warning, I counsel you by way of caution to forbear from crossing the moor and those dark hours when the powers of evil are exalted. So the Moor is already given this mysterious and powerful personality by which these evil powers will, these apparitions will apparate as they are wont to do. And by virtue of that setup, that very characterization of the Moor as this all-powerful entity, it's always there, looming in the background, whether or not the Hound makes an appearance.
Well, that's well said. Yeah, I think you're right. But, another way to look at this is to say to yourself, okay, well, the Moor here is a character. Now, what is it that characters do in stories? Well, at the highest level, they do things. I mean, you have Barrymore. What's Barrymore going to do? Barrymore is going to move clothes around and wave candles and signal to people. And what does Stapleton do? He does X, Y, Z. Well, what does the Moor do? Well, the Moor shapes the plot. The Moor hides fugitives. There's somebody running around. The Moor kills Sir Henry's ancestor. The Moor it shelters Sherlock Holmes, who's in this cave. The Moor almost kills Sir Henry, and it's like for example, it affects other characters. Characters in stories affect other characters. Well, the Moor determines what people can see, what people know. So it controls the revelations. Mists come in. Oh, wait a minute. We're lost. So the Moor is really, in some cases, in Hound, an antagonist, or it's a secondary kind of a character, but it's just as important as the Hound itself, And so this is really a major. Now, elsewhere in the canon, in the Copper Beaches, you've got this isolated countryside. And Holmes doing everything he can do to. Holmes frequently explains to Watson why he's concerned about otherwise bucolic settings, because here, no one knows what's really going on. Well, and then in Black Peter, you've got this cabin by the sea that, that kind of replaces the Moor. It's a place where things can sort of fester away, if you want to think of it like that. But here, the Moor is a big deal. It's a big character. And the Devil's Foot, of course, you've got Cornwall.
Same kind of thing, yeah.
Yeah. And this is vintage Conan Doyle.
Well, I really like that. I almost thought as you're going down this road of Moor as a character, a lot of times, actors, as they get into character, they like to understand what their character's motivation is. Right. What's the Moor's motivation? And one could say, well, it's part of it is, in order to understand its motivation, you need to understand its history. What were its origins? What was its childhood like? Where did it come from, etc. And we've got plenty of that in the stories. We hear of these prehistoric stone huts. We hear of the legend of the Hound. We hear of Sir Charles's history with the Moor, etc. So we do get a bit of a backstory there with the Moor. And I'll go one further to say that in addition as its role as a character, it also brings out the characteristics of other characters. So it's almost a blank canvas against which each of their motivations and strengths are painted. So, for example, for Watson, well, the Moor is something of beauty. And the way he describes it in his writing, the nature scenes, the bleakness, the emotion that's evoked from the very visual aspect of the Moor, that's a thing. For Sir Henry, the Moor symbolizes potential, as he seeks to put lights around Baskerville Hall and modernize this place and really try to tame nature as he arrives at Baskerville Hall. And as much as the Moor exists and the legend of the Hound exists, that's Henry Baskerville's motivation. He wants to tame the legend of the Hound of the Baskervilles. You've got Holmes, for whom the Moor acts as a respite of sorts, a place where he can camp out, hide himself from others, and lurk even among the very few people that live there, still remain fairly out of sight. And of course, for Stapleton, well, the Moor is deadly. It's a killer. We witness with him and Watson in their first meeting, they witness the pony getting sucked down in the mire. This is symbolic of what, well, we think happens to Stapleton in the end. We're never sure. But certainly of his intentions towards Sir Henry, that he wishes the legend to subsume Sir Henry so he himself can take over the estate.
Well, I mean, that's very fair. All of that is very fair. It's from a literary standpoint, it's very much connected to these romantic and Gothic traditions. We know that Conan Doyle would, I think occasionally in his writings to his mother, he would say, it was how he wrote about the speckled band. He says, oh, this is a real creeper. And then I think, too, he wrote to his mother about the Hound. So he was enthusiastic about this sort of Gothic trend in things. and this pre-rational area, but is also connected to Conan Doyle's interest in 17th and 16th and 15th century Britain. He said, somewhere along the line, Conan Doyle said, it's all in the details. And of course, The White Company and the other books like this are full of these kinds of details about what people are wearing and doing. And here, you've got the details in the landscape of the Moor. And I thought, your comments about Holmes, I think, are very apt. It's in a sense, the Moor is everything Holmes can't control. It's instinctive, it's ancestral, it's emotional. So it's kind of an adversary for Sherlock Holmes. But guess what? He triumphs, doesn't he? So there you are.
Yeah, and I think that's a wonderful example of how Holmes, as we see so often through the stories, he becomes a chameleon of sorts, taking on disguises, ingratiating himself to certain people, and fitting right in without being noticed. Well, he manages to do that with the Moor. He understands its power as a great natural resource, and even though he's getting his dry cleaning and his food, he manages to camp out there. I want to read a segment from the first report of Dr. Watson, which is chapter 8, where he writes to Holmes. He said, my previous letters and telegrams have kept you pretty well up to date as to all that has occurred in this most godforsaken corner of the world. The longer one stays here, the more does the spirit of the Moor sink into one's soul, its vastness and also its grim charm. When you are at once out upon its bosom, you have left all traces of modern England behind you. But, on the other hand, you're conscious everywhere of the homes and the work of the prehistoric people. On all sides of you as you walk are the houses of those forgotten folk with their graves and the huge monoliths which are supposed to have marked their temples. As you look at their gray stone huts against the scarred hillsides, you leave your own age behind you, as if you were to see a skin-clad hairy man crawl out of the low door, fitting a flint-tipped arrow onto the string of his bow. You would feel that his presence there was more natural than your own. The strange thing is that they should have lived so thickly on what must always have been most unfruitful soil. I'm no antiquarian, but I could imagine that there were some unwarlike and harried race who were forced to accept that which none other would occupy. Now,
well, there you have the reason why Holmes is absent from a lot of the Hound, because, and in fact, I think when Conan Doyle conceived this, when he and Fletcher Robinson were in Cornwall, of course, now our listeners remember this is published around 1902, if I remember right, The Hound, and Holmes is dead at this point. We think didn't return until 1903, and Conan Doyle's immediate thought was, this is going to be a great story. But only a little down the line did he realize that he needed to bring Holmes into it and said, oh, okay, fine. I think he would have been perfectly happy just having some other character go out and look at all of this. But to come to a conclusion and to find the answer, he really needed to reintroduce Holmes retrospectively.
Yeah, and
Holmes Holmes is not experiencing. Holmes isn't talking to Watson about the Moor. It's right. It's the real man there that's experiencing and writing this.
Yeah, and Holmes is really a minor character in this story. It's the Hound that looms large. It's certainly Watson that commands so much of the page, but it's also the Moor. Whether Watson actually describes it as he just did or not, this is where most of the action takes place, and we are there, and it is with us. Wouldn't it be funny, though, if Holmes showed up in a caveman costume?
I'm just a caveman. Your world frightens and confuses me.
Might be funny to us, but I think Watson would say, Are you quite all right, Holmes? Well, it's a lovely landscape, but of course, it's just a trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You take my breath away, Mr. Holmes. Above all, avoid the Moor, when, as the old parchment quaintly put it, the powers of evil are exalted.